Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life,
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, news, any kind of trends that you need to know as a motivated Fort Worthian doing your day-to-day activity as a leader, as a worker, as a civilian. We want to give you some insight so you can move correctly throughout that space. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. What's happening?
Good afternoon. Well, I guess it's good morning when we do drop the podcast.
Yeah.
So everything is great. We're preparing for an eclipse, apparently.
Yeah, your house is full with a bunch of eclipsers.
Yes, my oldest child is out here from California, wanted to be in the area where the totality was going to happen. So he and his friends have been planning for months to all gather here and go to a ranch area that one of their family owns to see everything in totality. So there's 4 20-somethings in my house at the moment.
Nice, rocking.
Getting prepared for all of that.
And I know a lot of you probably, because, hey, you're going to be having this pod during the eclipse, so maybe you're listening to it while you watch, the sun,
hopefully
the dark.
That they're out there watching the eclipse. And hopefully the clouds are not ruining it. I was really pleased with my kids' perception of all of this. They put together this gathering of friends, and they're looking at it as a gathering of friends, and whatever they experience is what they experience. And they're not trying to, run around and find a cloudless place to do this.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, speaking of all the opportunity we have on this podcast to see a ray of light, we have Bud Kennedy on as our interview, and I feel like we made it when we got to this point. And so we have a full-on 50-minute interview with Bud Kennedy, plus we feel like we need to give you your 3 short stories and some wins and losses, because last week we just had Kaylee, and we just feel like there's some news that we want to hit for you guys. So this is going to be a long episode. So 3 short stories. Bud Kennedy's the big story. Then we'll do wins and losses. So let's go ahead and dive in with short story number 1.
So our first short story is a Fort Worth Report article. Tarrant County homeless population sees first dip in numbers since 2021. Lauren King, who is the executive director of the Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, gave a state of homelessness address on March 27th. And the good news is that the investment in housing that they've been making, and all the other folks that rally around and try to address issues of homelessness, has led to a 12% decrease in the Tarrant County homeless population. So we've made these investments in housing, which enabled us to reduce homelessness overall. And we're continuing to show that that housing first model is having success. So overall, the number of people living on the streets has decreased, along with the number of veterans and families experiencing homelessness. And the latest numbers from the coalition use the point-in-time count, where every year volunteers go out and count. And there were, in that count, 2,390 people experiencing homelessness across the county, with 81% of them being in Fort Worth.
Another big part to, I think, its success was the additional 400 emergency housing vouchers received from the federal government, which supplement the standard 350 vouchers allocated annually. Those extra vouchers helped housing families at a time when family homelessness reached an all-time high. You also then had the Department of Veteran Affairs poured millions of dollars into addressing veteran homelessness in 2023.
I think the overall takeaway from this story is that housing first model. I've been really invested in meeting with a group of folks who are addressing housing and housing attainability or affordability, or whatever term you want to use to describe housing, and how much rents are and how much it costs to buy a home. And so housing is not just housing folks that are experiencing homelessness, but making sure that there is a stock of housing available that addresses the needs of people at various income levels. Affordable housing has gotten kind of a negative reputation or connotation around that term. And so often people resist having affordable housing built near them. But I think that these numbers show that specifically when addressing the most vulnerable populations, having that attainable housing is what kind of counters homelessness, which is the most extreme of not having housing. But, other folks who have jobs and make good incomes struggle with housing affordability. And so it just highlights the importance of that housing first model, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, you actually bring a good point too, and now I'm throwing a wrench into the story because we didn't talk about this, but you sent an article about 9 acres in Fort Worth near Southside, potential proposed redevelopment for more affordable housing.
Yeah, that's an adaptive reuse of.
Would that be an example of communities possibly doing a bond or proposed bond or investments to support affordable housing?
I mean, not that specific project, but
Okay.
there is a group of folks that are looking at, and that was another article that we didn't pull up as well.
Yeah.
There was a Star Telegram article that pointed out that at the last work session that the city council had, they were discussing what was going to be on the bond election, and a couple of council members have asked staff to come back with a recommendation for an election, a bond election that would address housing. And so that is something that the council is looking at.
And I think when I was reading it, it mentioned, well, I'll put it into the notes with all this, but I mentioned that this could be the first time that
Fort Worth has never had housing on the bond.
Yeah.
And those of us that have been doing the research and trying to encourage this discussion have been doing the research of other Texas cities. So we're not talking about going and looking at out of state. There's many Texas cities that have had housing on their bond for many years, and there are some that have done it for the first time more recently, because I think everybody's kind of seeing that impact of the cost of housing. And so many Texas cities, besides Fort Worth, have had housing on their bonds in the past.
Going back to the main article here, Fort Worth homeless population numbers are lower than any other major cities in Texas, such as Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio, as you brought those up. And as you mentioned, I think the American Rescue Plan Act allowed people to consider more affordable housing in 2023. $64 million of American Rescue Plan was dedicated from Tarrant County and the cities Fort Worth and Arlington. And so over the next 2 years, the coalition and partnerships with the county and the city of Fort Worth will invest an estimated $50 million to create 300 new units for people exiting homelessness, including the chronically homeless and families. Those projects include Casa de los Sueños, coming online in August, and Presbyterian Night Shelter's Journey Home. So what's interesting, and the same week that we got the decrease in homelessness, there was also a Star Telegram article about eviction filings in Fort Worth soaring over the last 3 years. So, Ann, what do we have there?
So this article basically says that eviction filings in Fort Worth area have more than doubled between 2020 and 2023. This was presented in an informal city report published on Thursday. The spike, a product of expiring COVID area rental protections and ballooning costs of living, paints a bleak portrait for the rental market, once renowned for its affordability. Landlords in Fort Worth lodged just under 46,000 eviction notices in 2023, the report found. So during the pandemic, Fort Worth renters were shielded by pandemic eviction moratoriums and cushioned by rent subsidies. And they received only 19,505 notices to vacate in 2020, but that tally has been creeping up a couple of thousand the following year and skyrocketed to over 42,000 in 2022. And as I said, just under 46,000 in 2023. They have the racial breakdown that this affects Black residents in Fort Worth, accounting for 40% of eviction defendants. And women are also experiencing a disproportionate higher rate of filings. So I think what we were looking at these two articles and kind of wondering how with the skyrocketing eviction, the homeless numbers are coming down. And I was speculating, and I don't know if this is the case, that many of the efforts of groups that are trying to assist folks that are vulnerable to becoming homeless try to have kind of that early intervention. And so I think there's actually people who go to the courts where evictions are heard and help put people who are facing eviction in contact with temporary support, emergency rental assistance to maybe keep that eviction from happening, or because these are just filings of eviction. So not all of these filings result in someone actually being evicted. It is very disturbing that we have such a high rate here, and we probably need to figure out ways to combat that. But the hope is that some of that intervention is keeping those folks from actually falling into homelessness. And so that would be how we have so many eviction notices, but our numbers of actual homeless people experiencing homelessness are going down.
Yeah. And it looks like the city report proposed a roster of policy changes to combat the crisis. forcing landlords to pay slightly more to submit eviction notices, and guaranteeing legal counsel to tenants. HB 2127, a state law passed last year banning any and all city or municipal statutes regulating evictions or otherwise prohibiting restrictions or delaying evictions. Yeah, I mean, we were the number one in homelessness, but we're also the number one in evictions filings.
Yeah, but that House bill that you mentioned basically ban any and all cities or municipalities from putting in place regulations that regulate evictions or otherwise prohibit, restrict, or delay evictions, which were things that happened during the pandemic, and that's what kept our numbers low. But that House bill comes in and says that you can't do that. So that really complicates the more tenant-friendly reforms that many city and county folks were trying to do. So that's, again, that is definitely a negative. It's the state telling the city that they can't do tenant-friendly things to be more supportive of folks so that they don't face eviction.
I'm glad you double-clicked on that.
So our second story is a follow-up on some of the things that we've been kind of touching on pretty much every episode the last few months, is just shenanigans and things going on at the county level. And so we have a Fort Worth Report article entitled "Tarrant Election Office Will Switch to Pre-Numbered Ballots Following a Party Line Vote." So I don't know if you all remember when you go vote, there's ballots laid out on the table, and they are like blank ballots that get printed on as you put them into the machines. And apparently our county commissioners and our county judge think that this could lead to some kind of election fraud. And so they pursued looking at Tarrant County using pre-numbered sequential ballots in the November 5th presidential election. And they think that these pre-numbered ballots, or Judge O'Hare said that these pre-numbered ballots was a top request from constituents, along with lowering property tax. I didn't even know this was a thing. So apparently there's some other folks out there that are looking at this. But I think they did talk about who does this and who doesn't do this. And I think more counties don't do this. And what I found interesting was that there's a significant increase in cost for doing this. The ballots themselves cost more. And then if ballots are spoiled, they need to be thrown away. And if there are ballots that don't get used, they can't be used in subsequent elections because they're sequentially numbered. Yeah. And so basically, you got to throw out any ballots that don't get used. And so when I was reading through this, I think I shared with you that the blank ballot paper cost for the county would be $290 for every 1,000 ballots. Pre-numbered ballots would cost $320 for every 1,000 ballots. The cost difference is $39,000. But if you go on to calculate the overall cost, it was like $50-something thousand, or right. So I thought that the headline should say that the county commissioners voted to throw away taxpayer dollars because they literally are choosing something that I'm not sure really even does what it is that they're thinking it will do. Because the Star-Telegram put out one of their reality check pieces and asked, Tarrant County approves the use of pre-numbered ballots. Do they prevent voter fraud? And the practice is, in their opinion, outdated, largely unused by electoral authorities anywhere elsewhere in the United States. The ballots in Tarrant County already receive a unique identifying number at the moment of voting, and adding more identifying information to voter ballots could potentially make it easier for bad actors to commit fraud like vote buying and vote coercion. So the best thing for preventing a vote buying is secret ballots, he said in a phone interview. Ballots in federal elections are available for public viewing for 22 months after an election, and if a person feels that a vote is tied to a specific number, then someone who has bought or coerced a vote can use that pre-numbered ballot list to confirm that they got their bribe or intimidated. So I just think overall this is bad.
And that's the part, like, where if you wanted to get someone to vote for somebody, and then you can now confirm and follow up on the records if they did it or not. That's like the freedom to keep your vote anonymous is, I think, kind of scary here. You know, I even imagine.
It says a secret ballot is pretty important to the principles that we've been following for over 100 years to prevent people from being paid or coerced to vote in a certain way.
Yeah. So that is also very disappointing on this, and just kind of continues to shows the pandering that the county leadership does on voter integrity and doing necessary things that actually, like Ann just said, cost us more money. So much money you could hire someone.
And I think if there was indeed an outpouring of folks telling our county judge that they thought pre-numbered ballots was the solution to all of this, it's incumbent upon those people in elected office to do their research and inform the electorate as well, not just do the bidding of folks that may be misinformed and asking for things that don't address the problem or don't even are trying to address a problem that doesn't even exist. Because the final comment here is so the final thing is, does Tarrant County need pre-numbered ballots to prevent voter fraud? The board's vote to use pre-numbered ballots raises the question, does the problem it is meant to solve even exist?
And I think that's a great way to kind of tie it up. And I think going into now short story number 3, it's another county conversation where I think they're looking for a problem that maybe not exists possibly. And so what the short story number 3 about, which I actually think is a very top story that people should be thoughtful about, and that is that Tarrant County went so much to look at the criminal courts, and we're considering a far-reaching reorganization where the county commissioners approved a potential proposal to bring many positions under county administrative control. Some judges stood up and have stepped up to this issue to rechange how we approach this, but basically it almost felt like the executive branch was trying to swallow the judicial branch of government with the sudden change in the criminal court administration. This has been an ongoing story that we didn't talk about during Kaylee Johnson's topic, but then it expanded. I'm glad we didn't, because it looks like a lot of leadership has stepped up since to change this situation, where now that there is going to be an overhaul, a stop to that overhaul, and that people are going to come together as a group of judges, staffers, and commissioners to address what is best. And there was a lot of frustration around this, even experienced judges who never speak up in meetings coming out and saying they were against this. And this story is a hard one to navigate because it's so many pieces of stories being updated around it. What kind of timeline or points do you see we need?
I mean, the very first article seemed to show very clearly that a group of folks at the county commissioner and judge level had decided to do this without even speaking to those directly impacted, the judges themselves and the staff that they were trying to take out from under the purview of the judges and put them under the purview of the county. So that kind of begs the question of what was the reason for doing this? If you are wanting to have a conversation about efficiencies and making sure that people are, working the number of hours that they're supposed to be working and some of the other things that were brought up as reasons for why they felt like this needed to happen, then the first step would be to go and talk to the folks that are managing those staff right now and find out if there are efficiencies that could be improved, not to go kind of secretly and without even speaking to those people to the point where they don't even know it's happening until they read about it in the paper or until it's on the agenda for the county commissioner's court. And so I think this pause is an important pause, because clearly the folks that are doing the managing now, those judges you mentioned, spoke up and said, we're happy to have a conversation about this, but we think that this is problematic that you just kind of came in and sweepingly wanted to take it over without getting input from those who are the most closely tied to it.
Yeah, one of the issues that they cited in the reorganization proposal is a rapid increase in authorized positions within the criminal court administrators. The county's pretrial department had 17 positions. When the county switched to a central magistration system, those positions were absorbed by judges. Now the criminal courts administrators had 28 authorized positions for its pretrial program, a 64% increase from the 2019 numbers. So there's just a lot of talks. I even remember there being a talk in one of the articles around they believe that these judges were working 10 hours a week and getting paid for 40 hours salaries, and we shouldn't be paying for people who are only working 10 hours a week. So just a lot of, just unfair tactics, like you said, that you didn't
just
did
making
all
an
this.
announcement that they're doing away with this.
Yeah,
with the position. And, they have the purview over these things because that's some of the decisions that they make is budgeting. So if they hold the strings to the budget, then they can have some impact on how these things are done. But I think that this pause that they're taking in order to figure this out and have a discussion with the county commissioners as to what their concerns are, because dozens of folks showed up to protest the plan and the changes, and were very respectful in their requests of wanting to be a part of the conversation and not have these decisions made without their input.
Yeah, and one of my favorite posts about this, a friend of the pod and someone who's been on the pod, Alex Montevallo, he's on the Tarrant for Change, one of them, but I love what he just said. He said, Tarrant County Judge Tim O'Hare continues to make moves that would position him as king of Tarrant County. The latest attempt to consolidate power by the county administration serves as another wake-up call for Tarrant County residents and leaders. O'Hare, along with Bill Wayborn and Tarrant County Criminal District Attorney Phil Sorrells, continue to change Tarrant County in extreme ways. They have redistributed funds for their agenda in the millions, prevented funds serving the community, and continue to build infrastructure that supports authoritarianism. The abuse of power trifecta must be stopped. Then you also had he continues to just talk about how you're literally trying to take an executive branch to then take over the judicial responsibilities. And that is, when you talk about democracy and why you have three branches, I think he was bringing up, and what I think he eloquently did is talk about how important it is to get average people and regular Facebook, like people who get their news on Facebook, to wake up and take this more seriously.
Right. And I think even one of the county commissioners pointed out that she hadn't been fully briefed on this. So Elisa Simmons had some strong words for the county administrator, saying that their staff had not briefed her completely on what they were doing. And she said, I'm not going to stand for this. We're all equal here. The county judge and all the county commissioners are equal. And so they all should be in on the things that go on to the agenda.
So those are the three short stories we just shared with you today. We talked about homelessness and evictions. We talked about voting, now numbered ballots, and now we're also talking about where the Tarrant criminal courts stand today with the proposed reorganization. Now it's time for the big story, and the big story today is a guest. Bud Kennedy is a Fort Worth Star-Telegram opinion columnist. He has a 52-year Texas newspaper career. He has covered 2 Super Bowls, a presidential inauguration, 7 Republican and Democratic national conventions, and 18 Texas legislature sessions. We get to sit down with someone who has the wisdom of Fort Worth and Texas, unlike any other. And so it's been a treat, and I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. Here is Bud Kennedy.
My Fort Worth story begins with being born here. I was adopted. My parents, my birth parents, had like too many kids at the time for the family, and so this was legal in Texas until 1957. They put me up for sale, and so they sold me for $600 in a classified ad in the Star-Telegram. Before I was born, it was an ad saying baby due in March, and you had to pay the mother's room and board. And so the family that adopted me, they were in their 40s and never had a kid. And Edna Gladney told them they were too old to adopt from Edna Gladney. So they bought me out of paper for $600. And I was really happy, to know that I was a wanted child. And so thrilled to grow up in Fort Worth and with a family that lived off on the near west side down by the railroad yard, and went to public schools here and stuck around and went to TCU a couple of years, and then finally left town, went to Austin for 3 years. And I tell people I worked in Austin, Dallas, and back here. That's my tour of the world.
It's the whole world right here in Texas.
I want. Did you say it was an ad in the Star-Telegram?
It was an ad in the Star-Telegram.
Wow.
My first newspaper appearance was before I was born.
Wow. Star-Telegram gave you kind of life and a chance, and you also did that with your career. That's beautiful.
Well, that's the beginning, and then there's I popped in and out of newspapers as a kid growing up. We didn't have many books in our house, but the Fort Worth Press came every day, which was the evening paper here, which is a feisty tabloid newspaper. And I loved reading the press, and it was like your world and national news, and it was thrilling reading the press. And I would sit and open up the press and retype stories out of the press and learn how to type. And so I was a little kid reading the newspaper. I would read the paper when I was little, and they have a picture of me reading the paper when I was 4 years old. So I would read the paper, and then when I was 11, I wrote the press a letter and asked if I could come see the newsroom, and they had me come down, and the editor said, "Come back someday and I'll give you a job." So I did, and he did.
Yeah, wow.
That's fantastic. I knew that story, but it's really great to hear it.
There were, of course, there's been such a vivid newspaper history here, news history, both broadcast and print. But there were 3 newspapers in the era when I grew up. The Morning and Evening Star-Telegram were really different. They had different reporters and different staffs and different content. They were different newspapers, and then the Press was an evening tabloid. It was not as sensationalist as like the New York Post, but it was about halfway there. So, but it was fun, and it reflected the working class nature of Fort Worth in the 50s and 60s. And evening papers were more popular then because everybody worked. Back then, it was post-war. Fort Worth was in the boom, and everybody worked the early shift either at what's now Lockheed Martin, back then General Dynamics, or at the packing houses, which were still going back then. So people would work these 6 a.m. shifts, get off at 3 p.m., come home, and they wanted to sit down and read an evening paper. And so Fort Worth was one of the major blue collar markets in the country. It's one of the major markets in the country for evening newspapers, where people really worked early and came home and read evening papers. And so there were all these newspapers. The morning paper was for the rich people who wanted to see the stock market prices, and then the evening paper was for the working people.
That's really interesting. It seems like there's less coverage nowadays, and I think that's probably one of the questions that we're going to get into with you about the
news
transformation of the news business.
News business or lack thereof. Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So as someone who has been in the news business all of these years, what is your take on kind of the changes that have occurred over all of that time? And do you have concerns about where we are now?
Well, it's so important. I mean, you all are part of the news business now. What worries me is just the lack of conversation. It used to be that there were 3 reporters. When I say there were 3 newspapers, that meant there were 3 reporters at City Hall. There were 3 reporters at Commissioner's Court, holding government accountable. And each one was working to beat the other on some sort of story, trying to hold the government accountable. So you had report, plus you had a very aggressive Channel 5 in Fort Worth, one of the trendsetters in television journalism. Channel 5 had first a newsreel type of newscast that is still archived at the University of North Texas, and all that old news film is just golden to go back and look at. So you had really a lot of working reporters. You had weeklies, the News Tribune back then. You had weeklies that also had a mindset that was kind of middle-class, working-class mindset, sticking up for the poor people. And so you had the news business was something that there was competition. And the worst thing that happened was when that number of reporters just started dwindling. And when there was only one in the meeting, that made it tough because
or none.
That one reporter wasn't on their toes trying to stay ahead of the competition. And then when you get down to none, then there's nobody holding anyone accountable. And there are studies that show that in communities that have lost their newspaper or their news reporters, where there's no reporter in the meeting, that taxes are an average of like 2% higher, and the waste and fraud is greater. That if there's no reporter there that ever writes a story, then the no offense, Ann, but the government body does as they please.
I think I tried to stay accountable even if there was no reporter in the room. But I remember people saying that our council meetings were in the evening, and so often there was a reporter there. But the county commissioners court met in the daytime on the same day. And I've heard county commissioners and other representatives that were at those meetings saying that the news didn't really know, and activists that were showing up at council meetings were not showing up at those county commissioner meetings for the first part of the time that I was serving on council. So I see that reflected in the time that I've been more aware of coverage or no coverage.
There has been a county commissioner's reporter up until the last year or two when we're between reporters sometimes.
Yeah.
But and then of course there was the COVID times and the times when we would watch it on video like everyone else. But there steadily has been a county reporter and a city reporter. Those are still two of the priorities to have. Although the county kind of falls, the county falls off the map first if we're shorthanded.
Maybe those daytime meetings are also a little harder. I think it's more the activists that weren't showing up at those county commissioner meetings, whereas the council was getting a lot of people coming and doing public comment.
Well, I certainly agree that the county commissioners don't get enough attention. The city council, as you know, the city council is is where everybody looks to.
Yeah.
And the city council in Fort Worth is under a great deal of pressure to fix everything and make everything better. And because of the long history of Speaker Jim Wright and the Congress at the federal level, people in Fort Worth, if there's a dog barking next door, people tend to call their congressman and their city councilman. They don't ever call their county commissioner, and that's something I've made a point of over the years. Is that there's more than just your congressman and your city council member to call. So that there are other levels of government responsible for all this.
Absolutely. I think I did experience that a lot, that everybody thought the city was in charge of everything.
Yeah. What is your current opinion or perspective on the leadership at the county level today? Like what should people be watching for or paying attention to? And does it look any different than what it used to look like in the past?
The county government is never any good. It was never even intended to be any good. When the Texas Constitution was written in 1876, it was after Reconstruction. They didn't want anybody to be strong or in charge of anything. So they divided all the responsibilities among, and now we have 56 equal county officials. We have the judge, the commissioners, the auditor, the tax assessor, and none of them is a boss to anyone else. They all are constitutional officials with their own offices. And so the county government is inherently inefficient. The people who try to make the county work like a city, or who think the county works like a city, are inherently frustrated and mistaken. The other elected officials don't have to do anything the commissioners say. The only power the commissioners hold is that they control the budget, and they decide how much money each office will have, but they can't really make any elected official do anything or instruct their staff in any particular way. So county government is always a mess. There's always cronyism. There's always fraud. There's always misappropriation. So that's the beginning of the problem. We've had a variety of county judges who have, some of whom came from city politics, like Judge Moncrief, of course, was county judge first before he became mayor, and Judge Whitley most recently, and Judge Vandergriff, who came from strong city politics in Arlington, and they have tried to make the county government a little more professional, but the county government in a lot of ways is still stuck in 1957. A lot of the attitudes at the courthouse are very different. The attitudes toward the people are very different. It just is not in any way a really professional business organization. Judge Whitley and G.K. Manus, the county administrator for the last 20 years or so, have probably done the most to try to professionalize the county government. But it's still, there's still inherent frustration because you can't make all 50 elected officials get along. So it's always a problem. What we have going on now is partly the result of the political shift in Tarrant County. In Tarrant County, there's been so much growth. There are twice as many people who live north of Loop 820 as there are south of Loop 820. And so you have the shift in all the new neighborhoods, all the new subdivisions who've attracted people from other states who moved to Texas because they like Texas and they vote in a more conservative or Republican way, or they don't know who to vote for. They don't know anything about candidates, and so they tend to vote for whoever they hear about from their church or from their parent group or whoever, their influence of their PTA. And so you have people who are new and came here with a point of view. And, Tarrant County is unlike, if you could, in Dallas County, the conservatives all moved to Collin County. And so Collin County was this, more staunch conservative. In Tarrant County, all those people are in Tarrant County.
They're all
north
mixed together.
Yeah, they're all mixed together north of the Big 20. So you have Fort Worth and Arlington, blue cities. Fort Worth less so, but you have Fort Worth and Arlington south of I-30 that are blue cities. But then you have twice as many people living north of I-30 that are in these heavily Republican precincts. And so right now we have an influence at the county level where we have a county judge who came from a city mindset, who was mayor in Farmers Branch, and who was politically active in South Lake, and he came from a partisan mindset. Judge O'Hare was Republican county chair, and so he stated from the very beginning that his goal was to make Tarrant County more Republican and keep Tarrant County Republican. That was his intent. And so everything that he's doing now is not about necessarily what's the even-handed professional level government or public policy. It's about doing what promotes Republican politics. And he said from the beginning that was what he planned to do, and that's what the people voted for.
Yeah, I witnessed that myself. I mean, having served in a nonpartisan office, serving all of the people has always been really important to me, and I think that should be the case even when you are elected in a partisan office, especially in a city that is kind of more evenly split. But like you said, he announced from the get-go that was his goal.
I think one thing that really worries me is that people are putting too much focus on Judge O'Hare. Judge O'Hare constitutionally is the moderator of a 5-member commissioners court. All 4 of the commissioners are the equal of the county judge. The county judge is not over anybody except the 4 people that work in that office. He's the moderator of the meetings. He has some appointment power, and that's where his real power lies, is in, I think he makes like 50 different appointments to boards and commissions. But as far as the clout that he exerts, he only has a lot of power if the other commissioners let him have it. And so there's Commissioner Fickus, who's been silent, and there's Commissioner Ramirez, who seems to be very carefully picking his spots about when he will argue with Judge O'Hare, if he does. And then you have 2 Democrats who, depending on the outcome of the election, or maybe not depending on the outcome of the runoff election, the 2 Democrats may be reduced to 1. I expect the commissioners to redraw the commissioners' precincts and eliminate one of the Democratic commissioners.
Wow.
That could be really frustrating. I mean, when this first all was being discussed, I had that, going back to what you were saying about what the county's purview is over, I had people saying, oh, well, the county doesn't have that much purview in Tarrant County because there's so many cities and so many larger cities. But it's interesting to hear you say that we're giving too much power over to the judge because he doesn't have that purview, but it seems like he's having a lot of impact. And I think that's what is concerning to some people. Even if he doesn't technically have that power, he's been using his bully pulpit to support other candidates that I think have that same viewpoint that he has of trying to keep Tarrant County and Fort Worth, inside Tarrant County as far right as possible.
As far right. And he said he wanted to do this. He said that the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that he wanted to be as prominent a Republican leader for Dallas-Fort Worth as the Dallas County judge is for Democrats. And so he said that he wanted to be that strong bully pulpit figure for Republican conservative leadership in Dallas-Fort Worth.
Yeah, because I think about like his newly appointed county administrator, Chandler Merritt, and like
that's appointed by the whole court, not by the judge.
Gotcha. And so but the whole, county commissioners court trying to take over in a way the criminals court with the situation there that just recently happened, the elections numbering, the loss of many leaders, Hyder Garcia and Vinny. It seems like he's, if what you just said, where 3 of the commissioners would be Republican seats now, he was a very vital part to making that happen.
Vinny was not very good.
Mm-hmm.
Hyder made a couple of mistakes that were fatal, although he was good in as an election administrator. He made a couple of communication mistakes that I don't think you would have liked to see him make in being condescending with the public or his treatment handling of the public. The whole situation of the commissioners wanting to take over the judges' staffs they're not really taking over the criminal courts or the district courts, but taking over the staffs and having the staffs report to the commissioners. First of all, this is a power the Constitution gives them. And since they control the budget of the county, they can assert that control over the staffs. But they're displeased with the workload and the work level in the district courts, and they're taking. That's the thing. Some of the things that the judge and the commissioner's court have been criticized for is something that did need to be addressed. And anybody needs to say, hey, you all need to work more, and we need to clear some of these cases, and we need to manage the jail better. And I mean, we need more help from the district judges in trying to manage the justice system. The whole purpose of county government is to operate the justice system. But the county commissioner's job is to fund the justice system, not to run the justice system.
And I think that was a part of that was doing it and then not having a conversation with those judges. So I think that's put a pause on all of that so that they can have that conversation and be a part of it, which you said is, an important thing, that we talk about these things and not just tell people.
It was a total blindside on all these other officials, and other officials will make your life unhappy if you cross them. I mean, these are all, of course, these are judges to begin with, but any county official has a power over any other county official. I mean, if the judge doesn't like, if somebody doesn't like something the judge did, the constable can go down and arrest them. The constable can go arrest the sheriff if they want.
It could be messier than it even already is.
Everybody has power over everybody else. So generally, these county officials have to work together.
Yeah.
And they have to pretty much agree or figure out a way to work together.
So going into what you've been talking about what the judges kind of stated intent was from the very beginning, do you think that there's a significant contingent of Republicans who are being swept up in this kind of rightmost voice and that they've been gaining traction from that? Or do you think that the Republican movement to the right has been kind of a natural evolution of politics that they've been running for like a longer period of time?
I think that the what we're seeing now in Tarrant County is a group that's always been there. I think what we're seeing now is not just the growth of the social conservative Southlake Keller Haslett axis of power, and that's of course where so many more people here now. But we also have seen the dwindling influence of the business Republicans in Fort Worth, and I think that what's happened is not just that Republicans are getting more conservative, but that the moderate business voices are weakening. And you don't have the kind of voices. You don't have a vivid candidate. You didn't have a vivid candidate to captivate the people in the election and primaries. You didn't have a candidate. Sheriff Anderson was defeated by Sheriff Wayburn. Mayor Price had a terrible time against Judge O'Hare because of the way the campaign was. The Southlake Keller Haslett Republicans are going to dominate the party and dominate the county because of population and because they reflect the staunch conservative church mindset of the voters in that part of the county. And the old Central Fort Worth power base just is not there anymore. We saw that in the DA's race last time. The Central Fort Worth candidate was Molly, I can't think of her last name, the prosecutor, Molly Westfall, and normally she would have been in a runoff. She finished third. The Central Fort Worth Republican from the old Fort Worth, the downtown gang or whatever you want to call them, it didn't even make the runoff. And you had the runoff between Sarles and Krause.
Yeah, that's interesting because one of our questions was kind of what do you have thoughts on the Fort Worth way? Because that's something we hear quite often from folks that kind of old, staunch, mainly maybe driven from the West Side Fort Worth way has been the group of folks that have had the most influence on what happens in Fort Worth and Tarrant County, and what you just described kind of shows that that's going away.
Well, I think, of course, the Fort Worth way has been taken by critics as something
negative.
As something negative. The Fort Worth way was a phrase that Mayor Moncrief started using, and it was basically the same thing as what you see or hear talked about in shows as the cowboy way. The Fort Worth way, he would describe characteristics as honesty and self-responsibility and things like that, and that was the Fort Worth way, and handshakes and do business, and that was all the Fort Worth way. But it became something. It obviously became something that was seen as the elite power way of keeping people down and keeping people quiet. Some of that was based on resentment over the way desegregation was handled, that the black communities in Fort Worth were kind of appeased, but were told, okay, if you'll just go along with us and do this, and if we don't have any trouble, then we'll let you have this, and that was the Fort Worth way, was to handle things quietly but never really make progress. So Fort Worth way was meant as just a rustic Western poem idea, and but obviously it means something very negative to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's interesting. Last night we went to dinner at Riata for a birthday party for a friend, and we were walking down the stairs, and all of the mayors that have ever served in Fort Worth are on the walls of the staircase coming down. And as you get away from the top where there's women, the last 2 times, it's all white men coming down the stairs. So my husband said, what do all these people have in common? And I was like, yep, you are correct. All of them are white men.
I think Mayor Cockrell was back there in the 20s.
Okay.
There was another woman. So
there you go.
What So I guess talking about that,
and I'm wrong. She was mayor in San Antonio, but one of her relatives was mayor here. Okay.
What about the Fort Worth way, or now that we're a majority minority city, what are things that you think we need to do to bring in more new voices to the table as we have this more modern looking city?
Simply engagement is what seems to be the biggest challenge. I think one of the things that's been a drawback for us all, for both government and media and everyone interested in public policy, is just the lack of knowledge and interest in leadership, public policy, government politics. The government classes are not taught and emphasized in schools the way they were at City Hall. Every kid in school used to take a tour and go to a city council meeting. You probably saw a few, but not a lot in the time you were on the
that was
council.
something that Councilwoman Bivens was always talking about, that when we had all of our meetings in the evening, that cut back on the ability of field trips and students to come to the council meetings. And so when they added a day meeting, that was something that she had been asking for years while I was still serving. So
yeah, I went to a meeting when I was a kid when this was the group that was the anti-establishment group. Mayor McKinley was mayor, and Councilman Hoover, and the bunch the group that was kind of the anti-establishment of their era, that wanted to defy the 7th Street gang. When I was little, I went to one of those meetings. That was a one-term council, by the way. They were gone after one. But the lack of teaching and interest and focus on telling children about government and politics and journalism. The education reforms, the Perot education reforms, took journalism out as a primary course in schools. It's not a 5-point course anymore. So you used to be able to take journalism in place of a semester of English. And so you had so many students who came out of school understanding objectivity and the inverted pyramid, we call it, style of writing, where the most important facts are first. And you don't have now, you have a generation, you have whole generations that don't know how to critically read a news story, or how to understand what's fact, what's opinion, what's politicized, and what's straight. And so the lack of interest in government, politics, journalism, the lack of education in all those, I think has really hampered the involvement of the Fort Worth minority population, and really all the population. But if going to the city council meeting is something that only the elite private schools do, then the kids are going to get left out.
I think that I've witnessed that. I think that's absolutely the case. And I think it leads to a lot of apathy. When you don't understand something, it seems, you don't want to go and look stupid. So then you tend to just not do it.
If it seems distant, if it seems like those people down there do that to us, those people downtown, this is not only something that's characteristic of the minority community. You dealt with people in Handley in particular who always feel like that the people in downtown always mistreated Handley, that they were left out, and everybody has to be brought in, included, and feel like that it's not them doing something to us, that it's all part of a city and we all do it together.
Yeah, I tried to share with folks a lot that the impact that a group of people coming to council absolutely has. I mean, children who don't even vote come to council after doing some research about the safety of, crossing the street in front of their school, and get Transportation Public Works to respond and implement infrastructure that provides that safety. And so if more people knew that, and there's where I find the struggle. So I think in your case, journalism answers some of those questions. Education answers some of those questions. What other kind of things do you think that we try to do it here on the pod? Try to encourage folks to learn about these things and take part. But I remember standing in the middle of an open streets event in Fort Worth and having people who were signing people up to register to vote, and having a woman that was signing people up ask somebody passing by, "Do you vote?" And he said, "Oh, no, I don't do that." And I was like, oh, I mean, to me, that was shocking. But she's like, "Oh, I hear that all the time."
Yeah. Well, and of course, I realize that this is becoming like an eat your vegetables discussion. Everybody out there, you need to eat your vegetables, but you just have to demonstrate to people. And the way Mayor Bolin used to do it, and I've done this, is that Mayor Bolin would say, "Okay, I want everybody who voted in the last city council election to go stand over on this wall, and I want everybody who didn't vote to go stand on this wall." And there would be a few people in the voted wall and a lot of people in the didn't vote wall. And then he would go over to the little group that voted, and he would start talking to them very quietly. And within a few seconds, somebody on the other wall would holler out and say, "We can't hear you." And then he would turn around and say, "I can't hear you. You don't vote, and so I can't hear you about what you want or what you need or what you'd like to see in the city of Fort Worth." And it was a good, vivid way, and I do that now in club talk sometimes. When there's a city council election coming up, I try to explain, that this is really an election where 2 or 4% of the voters, depending on the election, make all the decisions. Even in the political primaries, you have 6-8% of the voters making decisions about who's going to serve in the Texas legislature, and who's going to represent Texas in the U.S. Senate, and things like that. So if you don't vote and participate, then you just have to really try to get people involved. Then you get down to how they get information. That's become a terrible problem. You have the dwindling coverage in all the news outlets. You have the complete, that the League of Women Voters and their voters guide have just vanished. You have nothing that you can hand out or pick up at the grocery store or anything that says, here's who's running. You have no information about the candidates. And we see people searching. We get reports on how many people are searching. We see the Google searches that people are looking for information. That's why we've gone back to emphasizing the Star-Telegram recommendations in elections, because we find a lot of people want to read them.
Yeah, they're definitely looking for that. We get calls from people, who are you voting for? Who do you recommend? They want an easy answer. Yeah. And if it's hard to dig for it, then they tend to give up.
Yeah, and our most viewed episodes are like what's on the ballot, who's running. Those episodes I actually see most people listen to. So they're seeking what to do in a way.
Yeah.
Speaking of seeking what to do, you had a column, an opinion piece column recently, where you were suggesting that Democrats seriously consider voting in the Republican primary because there was some, I guess, more important races or not. So, you gave an out, which I appreciated, because I live in County Commissioner District 1, and you said if you want to have a say in who's going to possibly make a runoff there, then maybe you stay in the. I don't think I could have brought myself to vote in a Republican primary anyway. But what was the motivation behind that? And do you did that raise concerns with anybody that you were suggesting that?
I don't understand. I didn't think that was a revolutionary idea.
I think EJ came up with it a while back, and he took it as total confirmation that he's a really smart guy when he saw you were suggesting it as well.
And the point I made there, so you didn't. Oh, that's right. You had to vote in the commissioner's race.
I did.
And I did say if you really need to vote for county commissioner, then go ahead. But the Republican primary in Texas is where all the decisions are made, is where all the leaders are chosen. This is not new. Everybody votes where all the leaders are and where the important people are. It's become more important as the Democratic Party has weakened to just almost third-party status in Texas. But the Republican Party primary is where everything happens. The reference I made in the column, and this is what I always tell people, is that I go to the grocery store with the most selection. And so I think you go to the primary that has the most selection. And in this case, if you have clear races on the ballot where there are independent-minded Republicans or more business-minded Republicans, people who are leadership-minded against people who are so-called movement Republicans, whose goal primarily, however conservative the party is, to make it more conservative. If there's a clear difference between those candidates, then those are clear decisions. The political system in Texas is for everybody. You don't register by party. You don't walk around with a sign on your chest saying what party you in. The system is for everybody. It's open to everyone. You go vote. You participate. That's the way that candidates are chosen. And I think you vote in the Republican primary because that's where all the people are. It's becoming more important than ever as the Democratic Party just dwindles away.
Yeah, I think that has a follow-up question of Democrats seem to be frustrated with the establishment for perceived inefficiencies in the face of the Republican establishment having kind of that more aggressive position or power. And so do you see a more effective path that Democrats could do? But I think your suggestion is participate where there's those challenging races.
The Democrats are self-defeating. They were almost... their power is down to almost the level of the Libertarian Party, and they don't participate with the people who could help them. They don't help the Speaker Strauss, Speaker Phelan. They don't help the people who are perceived as moderates. Instead, they leave Austin and go to Washington to protest voting rights or whatever. As the Democratic Party has shrunk, and the pressure grows for Democrats to be more progressive or more liberal. The same thing is going on in the Democratic Party as in the Republican Party. The pressure to purify is what really damages, any hope. The difference is the Republican Party has a majority. The Democratic Party is small and trying to get smaller. And the Democratic Party right now, there are about 40% of Texans are Democrats, but only about 21% are progressive liberal, would fit that category. And so if the Democrats try to be more progressive liberal, their share of the vote is just going to get smaller and smaller. The future of the party has to be to try to be able to reach for independents and reach for moderate voters, reach for business leaders who are disturbed by what they see in the Republican Party, by policies that may drive businesses away from Texas or may hamper the business. This is the problem. The Democrats are going to have to live up to corporate profits and say, okay, we're going to try to help you corporations. You make money and keep going. And some Democrats are not going to want to do that. It's a challenge for Democrats to try to reach to the middle. Republicans find it a little easier to reach to the middle, but it's very difficult for Democrats. The other problem with Democrats is the total lack of any visible figure, leadership figure. It's been that way in Texas for a long time. I always try this with a group. I say, name a Texas Democrat, and they'll
like
sit
a
around
current
and
one.
think.
We could all name past ones.
No, I say the test is name a Texas Democrat, and people say, well, Beto. And then I say, okay, name another one, and they'll say, well, Ann Richards.
That's the past.
Yeah, and then I'll say, okay, name me another one. They say, well, LBJ. And there is no other.
Are we forgetting all about Wendy Davis?
There is no other Texas Democrat to name that has the profile that I'm really sad about. Had Senator Davis run for mayor when that opportunity presented itself, she might have been mayor, but she didn't wind up taking that path, and she wound up taking a path that steered her away from the middle instead of toward it, and that might have posed something different for her career and maybe something a little different for Fort Worth, but it didn't work out that way. But the Democrats are just, they don't have any prominent, visible figure, and I understand what you mean about Senator Davis, but Senator Davis, the prominent figures in the Democratic Party now are Black American women, and those are the prominent voters, and those are the prominent leadership figures. The faction that Senator Davis represents is not even a majority within the party, and she's in the 21% now. So that's not going to win elections.
I totally get it from a state side, but it seems like if you look at Fort Worth, the Democrat or the progressive kind of keeps the Republican Party a little bit more moderate, right? We have a Matty Parker instead of a Steve Penate, and I don't know if a O'Hare or a Steve could ever really win the city. So I guess in Fort Worth, how do you feel about this language? You talked about the Democrats from a state side. How do you look at it in the city? Or do you feel like it could get hijacked as well?
There are more Democrats on council now than any time in my memory. It's always seesawed between 5-4, one party or the other. But I think now I think it's a Democratic majority of 2, if I remember. But so there are more Democrats now with the swing of the Southwest District, the Jungus Jordan District, that added another Democrat. So I think that the Democrats obviously, and it's going to continue to be this kind of knocking heads where the Democrats dominate the council the way the maps are drawn, but a Republican probably wins as mayor, at least a moderate Republican. The voting strength, the tremendous voting strength in Northwest, I don't think people in Old Fort Worth understand New Fort Worth at all. You need to drive out to Northwest High School on Election Day, and that's 21 miles from where we're sitting here at I-30 in Forest Park. You need to drive out there on Election Day and see. It used to be the same council member that represents Arlington Heights represented Northwest in Denton County, and that was the second or third largest voting box in that precinct. And so you need to see those people come in who are Fort Worth residents who all just moved here. They are all, they're unsure. A lot of them didn't even know they moved into Fort Worth. They thought their address was Roanoke or Keller, and so they're all here to vote. They don't know why they don't have roads. They don't know why they don't have lights. They don't know why they don't have sidewalks. They're unhappy with the services they receive, and so they want everything fixed now. It's even worse if you get a little closer to the people who live in North Tarrant County, and our former editorial writer, Nicole Russell, was one of these. But if you live in North Tarrant County in the area between Eagle Mountain Lake and I-35, then you might be between the two Burlington Northern Main Railroad lines, the main railroad line north to Denton, and then the main railroad line that goes to Wichita Falls and to Denver. Well, there are people who bought homes in subdivisions between those railroad lines. In order to leave home, they have to cross a railroad crossing at one side or the other that has 40 trains a day, a major rail crossing. And so they have to stop for trains all the time, every day, wherever they go, for emergency vehicles to get in or out of their subdivision. They have to worry about trains. They came in, there's no internet. They don't have UVerse. They have to have satellite internet because they can't even get an AT&T cable. They don't have.
There's some of that situation in South Fort Worth as well. I've had friends that had to have boosters in South Fort Worth that are a little further out.
They can't even get Spectrum.
Yeah.
They can't get even the weakest, and so there are people who are tremendously frustrated with Fort Worth, and they moved in and they found things. And I tell people those, let me ask, when did you move in? And they say, well, 2022. I say, well, those train tracks were there, weren't they? I say, yeah. Well,
that tends to be my response, too. The trains have been there a long time. And then also people don't.
And, of course, in Fort Worth, we have the history of the tarantula map, and the city's always been crisscrossed with trains.
Yeah. Not everybody looks at maps the way probably you and I do. And we're looking at real estate and trying to figure out where to live. Because I literally had a map that realtors put out when we were house shopping that had concentric circles from the core of the city. And my goal was to be in a neighborhood that was more in the core of the city. But I think a lot of times, the prices have gone up in that area. And so people do that drive till you qualify and then don't necessarily put in the time to look at what the external costs will be. Your house might be cheaper, but the getting from here to there. And as you pointed out, you would have to drive to that area.
But my point is that the people who have moved in, we need to be aware in Fort Worth as we're sitting in Mistletoe or Ryan Place or Eastwood, wherever we're sitting in Fort Worth, Highland Hills, we need to be aware that there are so many more people now. I think there's an equal number of people in Fort Worth north of Meacham Boulevard as south of Meacham Boulevard. And we need to be aware that that is a giant city of people who don't understand a lot about where they are, why they're here, or how it works. And and Mayor Price talked about this a lot, about the real need to reach out and to bring those communities into the city and to be sure and include the newer communities in Fort Worth. But when we talk about how many Democrats or Republicans are going to be leading, or is Fort Worth going to be a Democratic city? Fort Worth is less Democratic now than it was in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, when Mayor Barr was elected, Fort Worth was more Democratic. The Fort Worth is more Republican now, and will continue to be more Republican, to increasingly Republican as the northern neighborhoods fill in and some of the southwestern neighborhoods.
Yeah, there's a lot of ability to fill in for sure. There's a lot of land out there we've been talking a little bit about the city's comprehensive plan, which hasn't been updated in its totality since it was created, I think, 30 years ago. And some of that has a lot of yellow, which designates single-family residential. And if all of that continues to develop in that way, it will continue to have those kind of frustrations that you just described that those people are having.
And I'm not against I'm not against the growth, and we have a great successful city. I'm thrilled that people want to come live here and join in. I have been really happy to see the focus on bringing people into the inner city and redeveloping neighborhoods in the inner city. But the whole point of that makes Fort Worth a fast-growing city, and that is what we did right that Dallas did wrong, was Dallas let itself get landlocked by all the other cities, so Dallas can't grow, and Dallas population is not quite, it's not declining yet, but it's certainly leveled off. And Fort Worth is more like Oklahoma City, where we sprawl out 20 miles in every direction and continue to grow.
Well, talking about that, having 3 papers before and having a morning and an evening edition, I think it's a positive thing to have additional folks out there doing it. I had some questions about, and maybe you can chime in on this the youthfulness of some of these reporters and coming from other locales. So as someone who is, born and bred Fort Worth, and I know some of those younger reporters have identified you as someone who has just been incredibly helpful to them coming to Fort Worth new. When I see these brand new baby reporters, I don't mean to be disparaging, coming in without any institutional knowledge about the city. I'm excited to hear their takes on where we can go in the future, but I have concerns about them just not having that institutional knowledge. How do you think they're doing balancing that?
I think that has always been the case. I think our reporters, it's only a little bit more so now that our reporters tend to be 4 or 5 year experience, out of college, maybe second job kind of situation. But I think it's always been that the basic reporting crew has been, young people in their 20s who are out of college. I think the difference now is not the youth of the people coming in, but I think it's the kind of young reporter that we get. And I love the young reporters we have. I think they're brilliant. I think what we used to see when the journalism business, when salaries were more competitive with other industries, then you got students. I worked with reporters who chose to become reporters instead of going to medical school, instead of going to law school. But they wanted to be reporters because they felt a mission and they felt like that they could make a living wage. And we paid more than school teachers. We paid comparable, at least, with public servants, police, firefighters. It was a good way to make a living and raise a family. And the journalism business has fallen behind that some. And journalism and social workers are the 2 lowest paid, bachelor's degree occupations.
And a lot of, have to address and witness a lot of traumatic things that make that even more challenging. Right. And so you can see that. I know you mentioned that you'd heard our interview with Kaylee Johnson, and she had mentioned how challenging that can be. So,
and that the having to see trauma for young reporters, and we first started observing that and treating it with the tornado in West Texas 20 years ago that wiped out the little town of Saragossa, and the reporters that went out, and just there was the town, there's nothing left but splinters, and they came back and they were just basket cases, emotional basket cases. That's where we first observed it. But the impact on young people is terrible. What happens to young people in the business is really sad. And so you have young people who are put in a difficult situation, and the salaries are no longer even close to competitive. What are the unions are negotiating for salaries? I think the business wants to pay $47,000-$50,000 with a lot of companies. I don't even remember McClatchy's specific figures, but in general it's $47,000, $50,000, $60,000. The unions want $65,000. It's like that just the salaries are not anywhere close. My gosh, look how much money you make. I couldn't believe the sheriff was advertising for a communications person the other day for $117,000 a year. The sheriff didn't used to make $117,000 a year. The salaries are just nowhere near competitive to other industries, and so it's not. The reporters we get are really smart, but the pool of applicants is nowhere near what it used to be, and I think that's affected the kind of the experience level of the young people who come in.
And as they get that experience, then they probably want to make more money. And if there's no growth potential there, then they go on to do other things. And then you have to bring in a whole new batch of young people.
You bring in more young people. And Steve Kaufman, our editor, is great. He's a really wonderful coach and trainer with young people. He really handles reporters well. The young people here, and he's obviously people that we've had on our staff in the last 4 or 5 years have gone on. Abby from the courthouse went to the Houston Chronicle and so forth. So obviously we have people who go on to better jobs, and that's good news because it means we trained them well.
Yeah. So when you're covering local politics and national politics, what is there that you need to do to balance that? I sometimes see some articles in the Star-Telegram, at least on the online kind of social media platforms, and they're talking about things that are happening in other cities. And I always go, and a lot of them are very sensational articles about something horrible that's happened to somebody. And I'm thinking there's got to be some tie-in to Fort Worth that makes this be appearing in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Do you know what that's all about? Because I've been curious to see that, because I'll go read the article and there doesn't appear to be any tie-in with Fort Worth.
I did mention that this is a free enterprise business. And so it's important for us to have readers and to have people read stories. The Facebook page carries those stories. A lot of the people who look at Facebook are not paying subscribers, and that's why they're looking at Facebook. So if you're browsing through Facebook, if we can, if you'll look at something.
Grab your attention.
If we can grab an attention, if we can pick up some revenue off somebody who's not a paying subscriber, then we've picked up a little more revenue. This, again, I'm sorry, I've worked in newspapers 50 years, and this is not anything new. The Fort Worth Press that I talked about in the beginning would have big headlines that said, "Baby loses head in train crash," and then you'd pick it up, and it would have been in Jakarta, Indonesia or something, But it was a way to get nickels out of people's pockets and sell newspapers off the rack. So that the clickbait headlines used to be nickel bait. They've been around forever, and they strictly drive a few more pennies for the company.
That's interesting. I hadn't looked at it that way. I know I reached out to you at one point when I read an article that I felt like the headline was not super connective and reflective of the content of the article, and you were the one that shared with me that often the person who wrote the article doesn't necessarily have the last say in the headline.
Right, and that was the way then, and now more so. Now the reporters do write the headlines. So, but the headlines are written in order to be Google SEO friendly now. And so they tend to have more terms, recognizable terms. And we'll say that something happened in the Fort Worth area instead of saying that it happened in Pantego. So we tend to, if you look at headlines and say, well, that's not quite right, it's because it's written for Google.
Yeah. Let me ask you about, I'm curious, you started as a young reporter in Fort Worth as well. And I think, as a young podcaster or the young reporters at Star Telegram, what anxiety or what did you have this villain mindset, or were you out to get the government? I feel like the older you get, the more clearly you see how the world works. Several times you said, well, it was clickbait to nickel bait. Were you ever an anxious young journalist who thought you had to catch evil? And what would you tell that person now, the young Bud Kennedy trying to be a great journalist?
Well, the people who were out to get the government came along after me because we always complained that all the kids who grew up in the Watergate era just wanted to go out and overturn the government, and they just wanted to find that they thought everything was crooked, and they just wanted to go over and overturn everything. Now, I like investigating corruption. I like holding people responsible, but I don't think that the correct mindset is to go out and say, okay, I'm going to change the world, because you find out very quickly the world does not want to be changed. I think the correct mindset is that you hold up a mirror to the community, to the state, to the people, and you hold up the mirror and you show the people who are readers of the Star Telegram website or whatever. You hold a mirror and you show people, said, this is what your city is like. This is what you're like. This is what the people are like. This is what's going on here today. And so that's the correct mindset. What do I wish I told myself? I started as a sports writer, so I loved covering sports. Sports writing is so easy because you have a story to tell every day. You have a winner and a loser, and you interview people after the game. And it's, at city council, there's never a winner or a loser on any given day.
There's always winners and losers, I think.
But it takes like 9 months. It's like they have to have hearings and committee meetings and everything. It's like the game isn't finished. It's like it's like a baseball game that goes on for 9 months or something. It's like sports is easy because you have a pet story to tell. But what would I have told myself back then? I would have told myself probably not to get hung up on trying to be a great writer, and just really focus on being a good reporter, and that you don't have to be the next Dan Jenkins or the next Larry McMurtry. That may not even be what people want. That you need to be the person who knows government, knows public policy, knows urban affairs, and knows how to get the stories.
I love that, knows urban affairs.
Yeah.
Because I'm definitely one that thinks everyone should know urban affairs.
I was an urban studies major for 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah. See, I've convinced a lot of reporters to go to planning school, I think.
Yeah,
at least one. And Luke Ranker.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, and Luke, and I mean, we have several other people. I mean, OK. Carter, the guy my age from the report, he's, UTA,
professor.
Yeah, urban
grad.
affairs. And I mean, I think urban affairs is a natural direction for reporters to go to, and then we have reporters who became planners.
So now we just need to get the general population to be at least a fraction as interested in these topics as the people who dive into it full force.
And I love cities. I did not grow up in Cowtown. I grew up in Fort Worth when I thought it was the biggest city around. Then one day when I was 11, I sneaked off and caught a bus to Dallas to see what it was like, and it was big city, but I grew up at this corner of 7th and Houston with the towers all around and the banks and the department stores. And, I didn't live at 7th and Houston. I just mean figuratively. I grew up in a downtown. There was this wonderful, active, vibrant place of business and commerce and banking. And I loved going up. I rode up to the top of the skyscrapers and asked whatever president was up there if I could look out his window. It's like I was just thrilled with being in downtown, being in cities. And I love cities, and I love studying cities. I talked with urban studies at TCU when Bill Ray started that department, and went to it when I transferred to Austin. The best course I took at UT was a course in Chicago and how Chicago grew. And so I've always, this is when I was still a sports writer, but I love everything about cities and how they grow and how they operate. So I'm not the kind of guy that's going to retire to my ranch.
We have the May 4th and the May 28th election.
Right.
So I don't know if there's anything that you see particularly important in those that people need to be aware of and get up out their seats and go participate.
Well, I don't think people know about the appraisal district board election, May 4th. That this year, when we have the city and school elections, we also elect the appraisal board, 3 seats there. And there is a ticket of candidates from the South Lake Keller group, and there is at least one, Fort Worth candidate, and I don't really even know about some of the other challengers. But that is the first time we've gotten to elect members of the board that manages the appraisal district. These are not people who decide how much your home's worth, but how the district is run, whether they have open meetings, whether the computer software works.
Yeah, whether the website shuts down, whether you're able to go and do the searches that you normally do.
Yeah, so that's important, and this is odd to have a nonpartisan election that's operated, by the county, but that's on the May 4th ballot along with the little, and there's really not city or school. There's
in
city
Fort
bond
Worth,
election,
but there are some of the school districts that touch Fort Worth, I think, have some elections.
Right. A lot of
some of the other cities around Fort Worth.
Yeah, that's the other thing in the May 4th election is that all the school boards have the same political battles going on over book banning and prayer and all the things that have been going on in Tarrant County all over the country, and schools are going on in all the suburban Tarrant County elections.
Yeah, so we encourage folks to pay attention to that and get educated and informed, and hopefully there's some information on the League of Women Voters or some of the other sources of finding out.
Then there is the runoff later in May. That's the day after Memorial Day, which means almost nobody will vote. So, you just got to try to remember to get out and vote. And
we'll have to share those early voting dates, too, so that we're not all just relying on that election day right after a holiday to
go
get
vote.
out there.
Go vote as fast as you can. I always go vote the first day unless I'm really uncertain about something.
It's so funny. Before I was in elected office, I always voted on election day. And then when I was in elected office, I saw how frustrating it was to watch the numbers trickle in so slowly, and I would tell all my friends to go vote on the first day of early voting.
Well, there's a real easy reason to vote the first day, because once you vote, they quit calling you.
Exactly. That's true, too. You stop getting all those text messages, and the mail doesn't stop coming, though, for the most part.
You get to see all the good mail.
Oh, we get a lot of good mail at my house.
You've done 18 Texas legislature sessions. What can you say about that history and just also the kind of your concerns of the legislature today?
Wow. That's like saying I visited 18 different, city dumps or something.
Oh, no.
The lawmakers in the Texas legislature used to be a lot more rowdy and colorful, but they also were a lot more dedicated to public policy. They wanted to build a good higher education system. They wanted to build a really good highway system. They had a real vision to grow a Texas that would be strong and successful. I think some of that has fallen apart in recent years because the burden of the political pull has kind of taken us away from the core ideas that make the state great. That's the problem, is that parties are pulling leaders away from the middle and away from their job at every level of government. And I'm not going to say that, partisanship is always bad, but I think that partisanship is destructive. And I think that keeping an independent mindset is most important, although it won't get you elected.
I would totally concur with that after watching 8 legislative sessions while I was in office. I think in the past we've had more folks down at the state level who had some local experience and maybe stuck a little closer to that good government policy making. But to watch people just file thousands of bills and watch how some of them get through and some of them don't is a super frustrating process.
Well, of course, now you have whole districts that are represented by people that were just basically dropped in there by their financial backers, and they really don't have any ties to cities in that district. They were just kind of sent in there and say, okay, we're going to fund a $3 million campaign. You're going to go represent this district, but you're really going to work for us. And that's so we have those districts where the person who's elected really doesn't have anything to do or know anybody in the district that they represent.
So that was a delightful visit with Bud Kennedy. He and I have kind of stayed in touch through all of the different jobs that we have had in Fort Worth and agree on quite a few things. So lately we've been visiting with each other via text message, and I think he discovered the pod. I'm not sure how long ago, but I think he reached out the other day and said, hey, I've missed out on what you all have been doing over here. And I said, well, how would you like to come on? And he accepted immediately. So we were really glad to have him, and maybe he'll be somebody that we continue to have back on a regular basis, because he really does have a wealth of knowledge about Fort Worth and a heart for Fort Worth. And that's definitely something close to our hearts, because we're constantly looking for people to want to be more engaged in what happens in Fort Worth.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and go into wins and losses, Ann. So we start with the loss and we end with the win. I'll go ahead and get my loss out of the way. Mine's a very selfish loss because I hope they do something about it. Recently, on April 4th, in the FortWorth.com, culturemap.com, site, Morgan's Ice Cream and Fort Worth Scoops as the best small batch ice cream. I love Morgan's Ice Cream. Morgan's Ice Cream is where me and my wife often go to. Where Morgan's Ice Cream's on the south side. They are on 321 South Main Street. They also have a spot in Burleson. But we were big fans, and we believe the best ice cream in Fort Worth was the Strawberry Magic, which was strawberry with butter cake crumbles. Here's the kicker. The last couple of times I've had Strawberry Magic, there wasn't a lot of magic, and it was just strawberry ice cream. There was no crumbles. The crumbles have gotten smaller, and I know a lot of people are crying about their cereal boxes getting smaller, their servings getting smaller. I'm seeing my Strawberry Magic get smaller, and it's a massive loss because it doesn't taste or isn't any magic anymore. They just need to call it strawberry ice cream. And so my loss is the no magic in the Strawberry Magic at Morgan's Ice Cream.
So hopefully somebody will let them know, and this will be remedied immediately.
Exactly. Hopefully.
So my loss is a little bit larger scale. There was an article in the Texas Tribune pointing out that UT Austin has announced a round of firings in the latest steps to comply with Texas DEI ban. And I think I've mentioned a couple of times on the pod previously that I feel like it's going to be very detrimental to higher education in our state as young people are making decisions about where to go to college here in the state, and folks from other places maybe looking at state schools see kind of this deterioration of these programs that I believe to be important programs going away. And I know that there are some universities who have been much more intentional in how they have continued to do some of this good work and not done these carte blanche, just mass firings, basically, and getting rid of these programs. And I think that there's some more nuance that could be followed that would allow some of this important work to go on. But this article seems to be just pointing out that UT has just decided to just let it all go. Yeah. And I think that's a huge loss.
And you made a good point, because now you see people not considering to go to Texas because of these issues. But it's not even just the second layer of problem there is the people who do choose to go to Texas schools and get educated in Texas and then become leaders in Texas, potentially become the Ken Paxtons, Greg Abbott Jr.'s. And so it's a smart play for the people who are trying to keep Texas white, Christian-only powered. And that is just, yeah, you're right. This is much bigger of a crumble than my crumbled cake strawberries. So my win for this week is you sent this article from Fort Worth Inc. magazine, Hillwood and Gauge Zero to develop Texas' first EV fleet charging hub. I know it's roads and trucks and cars, but I think this is really cool because on Tuesday, Hillwood is partnering with an Austin company that does first public commercial electric vehicle charging. This is a significant leap in sustainable infrastructure. Gauge Zero is basically developing their own facility that will be located in Alliance, Texas development in North Fort Worth. And the facility in Fort Worth will cater to trucks and last mile fleets. The groundbreaking initiative exemplifies an unwavering commitment to advance sustainable infrastructure solutions that prioritize our customers. It's also important to know that Gauge Zero has $10 billion in combined experience deploying innovative utility-scale clean energy projects. Gate Zero announced a commitment of $300 million from ARC Financial Corp. I know it's crazy because today, 5% of vehicles on the road in the U.S. That are heavy duty are electric, but they're almost 25% of our emissions. And so the need to reduce emissions is going to come truly on the heavy duty fleets and the amount of driving that we have these trucks going. And so for Fort Worth to be the first stop of something like this, I think is just a great innovative economic play as we electrify the world. And so if we could be the epicenter of that in a market like trucking, and we do have 35 from Mexico all the way up to Canada, Fort Worth is truly a nervous system of how things get to all the parts of the body of our country. And so now that we're also leading here, this allows us to stay relevant.
Yeah, and so since you brought that up, it triggered something that I remembered that I'm going to just have to mention and have you put in the show notes as well. There was a new book released this week called City Limits by an author named Megan Kendall, and it's literally about highways in Texas. And so to your speaking about 35 and the importance of connecting on the highways, she's written this book talking about that piece that you mentioned briefly about the pollution that comes from the use of vehicles, gas vehicles on those roadways, and the way that we can remedy the damage that was done by highway construction in the past and reconnect neighborhoods, which is another thing that I'm working on. So
have you read the book yet? Or
I have it at my house. I ordered it ahead of time and I have started it, but I have not read it totally yet.
What you should do is try to get Megan Kimball on the show.
I know she's been doing a lot of interviews, and I know her, so I might be able to. I will reach out and see if she's available.
And anyone's promoting a book will come on a podcast.
Yes, I think she definitely is looking for ways to talk about it, so we can reach out to her and see how that goes.
And what is your win?
So my win is also about transportation. I think we talked briefly last time about some changes that Trinity Metro is making to some of the bus routes. The title talked about eliminating the dash. I think that there's just going to be some reconfiguration and rebranding of certain buses on certain routes to cover, but it is going to result in the long run in, I think, more coverage by public transportation. But the article that sparked off this as a win is a Fort Worth article about Panther Island study giving advocates high hopes for better public transit. Basically, the fact that we're still talking about trying to connect these places in ways other than everybody driving in their cars and having to deal with parking. We are talking about connecting downtown through Panther Island to the stockyards and the north side, and all of that being done in more multimodal ways. And I think that as long as we're continuing to have those conversations, that hopefully eventually will result in actual action and vehicles on the road to do those things is a positive and a win.
Single passenger cars to an island seems like a really horrible idea.
Can you imagine where would all those cars park?
Yeah, exactly. There's only 800 acres, people. And, there's 4 roads coming in and out. So it's just, it seems like this would be very nice. You could park in downtown if you need it, to get to a certain area, then you can go and then you can come back.
My goal is to be able to not have to think about where you park in any situation, that you can just figure out a way to get on transit. Navigating all of these young people that are coming into town to see the eclipse has been eye-opening.
Oh, yeah.
We had one young man coming from Austin trying to figure out how to get from Austin to Fort Worth on a bus. And literally you got to go through Dallas, and it adds so much more time.
Oh, yeah.
Or go pick him up in Dallas, or have to navigate getting on another vehicle to get from Dallas to Fort Worth. So, it's been eye-opening.
Yeah. Well, that was a full episode. We've been rolling with a ton of interviews for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and we'll continue to do this work. We'll have an exciting one next week. We will look to be having a guest. We never like to tell you who's coming because we are afraid if they just cancel, then we got you excited for no reason.
Or we make somebody look bad.
Yeah, or make someone look bad. So we have a guest next week and also the following week, it looks like. So we will continue to bring these great minds and people with great experience and leadership to the pod.
And hopefully they won't be disappointed when we go back to sometimes just being the two of us.
Just the two of us. All righty, y'all. Y'all have a good one and enjoy the eclipse.